All right, everyone. This is Patrick Morrison from the Wolfpack Astrobiology podcast. And this is the first episode of The Den, where we all get together and discuss topics related to astronomy. And today we're going to be talking about the UFO phenomenon. So I'll introduce myself. As I said, my name is Patrick Morrison. I studied microbiology at Monash University. And for my master's degree, I studied a lot of astrobiology related topics. So would you guys like to introduce yourselves?
Sure, I got it. Yeah, I'm Mitch Wolver. I did my undergrad at Purdue in aerospace engineering and did my master's, and I'm in progress getting my PhD at University of Colorado Boulder, also in aerospace engineering. My specialty is in situ resource utilization, so how to leverage mass streams wherever you're at with human spaceflight missions. So particularly extracting metals from lunar regoliths, so we can build bases and manufacture replaceable parts while we're up there. Nice. And this is Jimmy Negus. My background's in astrophysics from University of Chicago and CU Boulder, where I got my PhD. My research has been on studying active supermassive black holes, but now I'm focused on studying the sun. And so I work on the GOES satellite program, which is a part of NOAA's mission to observe the Earth as well as the sun. And so I help calibrate and validate data related to the sun.
Hi, my name is Richard Archer, and I completed my master's in planetary science at the University of Colorado Boulder. I have an relevant undergraduate in biology. I've been interested in astrobiology for a very long time. My specialty is in terms of Mars habitability. They recently published a paper in Icarus looking at the crater and valley network data distribution on Mars from the lock-in, which indicates that it was a quite habitable planet when the Earth was still being actively bombarded. So I'm very excited to be here with my buddy joining me today.
All right. So first question, do you guys think we've ever been visited by extraterrestrials?
Well, I think, my science brain would say I need more evidence. And so, before I can say we have or have not, I think we have to analyze the evidence. And if the evidence isn't there, then I'm hesitant to claim definitively that we've, been visited.
Yeah, it's kind of like the orbiting teapot. It's like you can't prove it's not there, but I have no reason to think it is there in the first place.
But I doubt it. I doubt it. Anyway, I don't really know how advanced civilizations even develop, right? We have these ideas. I've heard this theory that there's like a series of bottlenecks, right? So whether that's sexual reproduction might be a bottleneck that species don't make it through, and then they just end up dying off, or perhaps the development of like a centralized nervous system might be another bottleneck, right? But then there may be bottlenecks in more advanced civilization space, like you get fission bombs and fusion bombs, and has anybody ever made it through those? And we don't even know for us, right? And you just find any kind of law. But it's difficult to say. Like I'm pretty convinced, given the size of the universe and the ingredients for life, that it's out there. I don't know if it could get here.
So, hi, this is Richard. So, in terms of business of extraterrestrials, I default back towards the idea of a biogeochemist. And from that perspective, then I would say yes, in terms of probably early microbial life. The earliest solar system was an extremely dynamic environment with a lot of impacts. And we know there's been quite a bit of material exchange between planetary bodies as well as planets migrating through the solar system, which was much denser in terms of potential biogeochemical precursors to life. Recent work on the International Space Station has also shown that bacteria and archaea from Earth, which on Earth are not anything particularly extreme, such as E. coli, can actually exist in the vacuum of space for a protracted amount of time and still be viable. Although they undergo a lot of genetic modification, they still can be viable in cultures after months to several years exposed to the vacuum of space on the exterior of the ISS. So from a causal perspective, I think panspermia is a very likely proposition. I also think that Mars, because of the lower gravitational potential well, preferentially transferred material to early Earth approximately 4 billion years ago during the end of the late Huge bombardment, which also, that's a topic for another day, but likely a data artifact. But at the end of the bombardment by larger bodies, you can sure you can have microbes of material transfer within our solar system. In addition, recent research regarding small bodies suggests that our sun is actually a portion of a smaller cluster which formed together at approximately the same amount of time. And we know that Oort clouds kind of rub up against other Oort clouds. You're able to actually transfer cosmological material between solar systems. We know for a fact that Oumuamua has gone through our solar system as a very dynamic body. To this day, it's still not determined what it is. I don't buy the hypothesis of a hydrogen iceberg, which some people propose. For those that don't know, it's a body that came from outside the solar system with an axis ratio of 10 to 1, which is outstandingly odd. Usually it's only 4 to 1 for an asteroid. It didn't show any sort of aspects of a comet, and then its exit trajectory was on a hyperbolic orbit, showed an increase in velocity passed by the sun. So a proponent of this we hear about in the news right now is proposing that it was a solar sail. So it used mathematical models, but in fact, of course, there was no direct observation. It was just through reconstruction by light curves, suggesting that this body was Oumuamua was at rest with respect to the background stars, and then accelerated out of our solar system. So the big proposition coming out of Harvard right now by Avi Loeb is that it was in fact an extraterrestrial probe. I have no way to discount that, although I did read the paper with the map for the curve fit best for a multi-kilometer solar sail that was only a few microns across. But that's a mathematical model, and the person can actually adjust mathematical models to sort of fit whatever scenario you might want, I think, to some extent. So that needs to be constrained. I don't think I agree with my colleagues, my friends here. I think mathematically it's absurd to think that in the vast universe that we're the sole intellectual species out there. I also agree with Mitch about the bottleneck events. We know that happens on Earth quite a bit. There's no reason that wouldn't happen on a grander scale. But being scientists, we're the show us the money kind of people.
Yeah.
We don't see it and we can't verify that. But mathematically, there's not really a way to discount it. What I would tell you, not at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it's like proving a negative. It's like, how can you?
Have we back propagated the trajectory of our solar system to see if we might have made contact with another solar system's Oort cloud, Rich, that you know of? Or can you do that with them all?
Yeah, they've done it to some extent. You know, obviously the stars are in constant motion around the galactic plane, and I know that Jimmy could give a lot better evolved discussion about this, but we also oscillate up and down, and we're dynamic in our orbit. And so the stars come in proximity to their Oort clouds, but they don't typically collide. Isn't that right, Jimmy? There's not really that much of a risk of collision, but the interstellar material itself should exchange to the Oort cloud.
I mean, yeah, that's factual. You know, for me, I just want to sort of take a step back, though, and consider what the appeal is, right? Like, so let's say there is, you know, an alien civilization visiting us. What do you think our society's appeal? Is it the unknown? Do you think that there's a threat? I guess I want to, you know, we get so lost in, you know, is it real or not? Is it possible or not? But I want to explore, like, what it would mean for us as a civilization.
Well, like, why do we feel the need to explore, like, Stone Age cultures that still exist today?
Or even consider the vastness of the deep ocean, which seems infinite in depths, and the species look like aliens, right? There's so much unexplored Earth still below our feet. You know, why don't we have that similar fascination below us. And so I guess from a societal context, what do you guys think is like the root of our curiosity here?
Could I pitch this idea over to Mitch?
Yeah.
Mitch, you mentioned you want to talk about. Can you talk about cislunar space as defensible space?
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll piggyback on that.
Yeah, I want to address Jimmy's question first, and then I can talk about that. I think that to me, Jim, it seems like, every human being struggles against a feeling of existential loneliness, right? Like, we contain multitudes, and we can't even really know ourselves, right? So we feel isolated from other people in this way, and even alienated from ourselves. And I think the idea that you might make contact, that we're not alone, the way that we feel that we are, that the way that we really are, right? And our own consciousnesses are part of ourselves, unless, you're on some psychedelic and that abates for a moment. But I mean, from day to day, right, we're all burdened with that. So I think it's probably people trying to slap a bandage on that. I thought about it a little, like, why? Because, like you say, the oceans are really cool. There's a lot to explore, but we're fairly certain there's nothing brilliant down there that we can have. Well, how do you define brilliance? Like for
Sapiens.
Mars, our conquest is to find any little shred of life. Like, we're obsessed with finding life, and I guess trying to understand the nature of this quest to find that extraterrestrial life, and when we do find it, right, if it's inevitable and our species lives long enough, what do we do with that in our hand? Let's say tomorrow we confirm the presence of aliens, right?
Well, like, where are these aliens? Are they on, like, do we find them like by a signal from space? Do we find them like as microbes on Mars? Or maybe something like a squid in Europa's ocean? Like, I think each of those is going to have like varying degrees of impact on our society. Because like one's just life, one's a sentient organism like the squid on Europa, and then another would be like a sapient organism like a signal from space.
Yeah, ocean. That's a cool one, right? Because like you see organisms like relatively low on the phylogenetic tree that score super high animal intelligence, like octopi, which are a mollusk. Right. Snails are dumb as toast, but octopi are like smart.
Well, like, I mean, that's true. Like, intelligence can evolve convergently.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like an interesting question about like what features are needed to develop higher intelligence, because being land lovers, the two groups of terrestrial animals that have evolved like high intelligence are birds and mammals, and they evolved a lot of features convergently, like warm-bloodedness and extensive parental care, but these are largely absent from cephalopods.
Yeah, and the other thing about them is it seems like their nervous system is far more distributed than ours, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I want to say I don't know the figure exactly, but some wild proportion is distributed in their limbs. It doesn't seem like it's nearly as concentrated in the brain and spinal cord. Obviously, they don't have a spinal cord, but it's not as concentrated. For that distributed intelligence, what might it feel like to have your intelligence distributed in your arms? Would you feel the same locus of consciousness? Is that biologically advantageous? Of course it isn't in some sense, right? The ego protects your own interests.
Yeah.
Even though you're an illusion. But the ego serves an important biological purpose. You just wonder what that must be like.
Well, I mean, if let's say you put different parts of your brain somehow in different parts of your body, they'd still be communicating with each other in a very similar way. So you get the nerves to run there. So it wouldn't be that, I don't think it would be that different for an octopus just because the parts of the brain are spread out. Because like our brain isn't just one homogeneous mass. There are parts of it that are dedicated to different functions.
So it's a challenging question because it's also a question of getting to the baseline of things that everyone's alluding to, and Mitch is explicitly stating to it, sort of what is intelligence, right? And this anthropomorphic bias, because along the lines of what Mitch said, we're biased not only in terms of our anthropomorphic form, but also our experience of space and time.
Absolutely.
So for example, so this morning, right, I was outside enjoying myself, feeling part of the whole universe, and a little midge landed on me, flew in my ear, and I squished it. Screw that midge, squish. Well, that midge didn't know it was bugging me, right? That midge, I'm like a mountain, right? And it's experiencing a completely different experience of space and time, trying to do its thing.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, it's just a parasite bothering me, and so I smush it. And the reason I bring that up is because I think that Mitch also hit the nail on the head talking about anxieties and social anxieties. A lot of these representations of alien life, I think, are really, again, anthropomorphic projections of our own anxiety, especially because we are Paleolithic organisms, right? Paleolithic organisms biologically with a brain that's Paleolithic, capable of interplanetary travel and quantum computing, but still Paleolithic anxieties of the lion in the dark in the forest. And also, of course, aggression, interspecies-specific aggression. And I think it's probably not a coincidence then that the representations of aliens look so hostile or humanoid. It's really sort of a projection of the sort of inner demons that the human species itself carries inside, right?
Yeah.
Well, I think that you're going down an interesting path because our mirror reflection is what's cast into the cosmos, right? And so we see these right? And so I think the nature of sensory perception, though. So for us, our thinking mind has dominated our consciousness. But who's to say that's the case for other civilizations or species, right?
Yeah.
What if olfactory, right? Or the sense of touch, or some other sensory perception was the dominant mode of interaction and processing, and their intelligence looks completely different than how we perceive with our limited thinking mind.
Well, I don't know if it would be that different because, one example is we all know that dolphins are wicked smart. We can recognize that, but we live in a world of sight. They live in a world of sounds. So I don't know if it would be that different if they use olfactory or sound or something.
Well, what do you mean that different? I mean, our world experiences are vastly different between dolphins and humans.
Yeah, but we can still recognize and tell it that they're among the smartest animals there are.
Well, that's our perception. I mean, how do you define intelligence?
Computational ability of the brain.
Can they that's a limited human perspective, though. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I know. A lot of it resolves around problem solving, things like that.
Yeah. Well, but there's a lot of latitude there because we all met in Boulder, and if you go west of Boulder about this time of year, starting about now, you start seeing the foliage change. A lot of those patches of trees are actually clones of single organisms. But it's been shown that trees, we're great astrobiologists, engineers, but we all suck in trees. Right.
Mm-hmm. Or look at a bee colony. How intelligent are bees?
That's a very interesting point because, I think where it would be very different, hard to recognize for us, wouldn't be if they were using sound or olfactory stimuli. I think where it would be hard for us to recognize is if they, let's say, evolved out of a hive mind. Because bees are hive mind organisms.
True, but I've heard that the Tokyo subway system, the biggest, most populous city in the world, was optimized using a slime mold.
Yeah, it's true.
Nutrient clusters at each one of the stations, and they were planting lines between those, and they used a slime mold to do it. And it was a very complex computational problem, and they had a biological solution of a very simple.
Yeah, look how complex the genetic code is. Look how complex our intracellular biology is.
So in terms of a slime mold, I think that I lost my train of thought, so I'll have to come back.
You're good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I just think we need to just having some caution in terms of, you know, our expectations or projecting our own images. You know, you like you say intelligence is computational power. What about the intelligence of the Earth, right? How much computational power does the planet have?
How does it do that?
It's infinitely complex, right? It's an organic
Well, that's
system that is far superior than anything we can attempt to mimic or recreate.
yeah, but you can't like put an input in it and expect it to solve a problem. That's
Sure, you can. You can. What happens when you know, damage the soil? There's a response.
Mhm.
The Earth very much responds to inputs.
And they're predictable. I mean, some
Well, that's true. That's true.
But like, you know, carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, that's a predictable response to that one.
Yeah, and I think we're finding that like more and more we look into it, there's more negative feedback loops that mitigate the impacts of global warming. There are positive feedback loops that exacerbate it.
You know what? One of the other things that's interesting is that talking about computation, it's been a struggle for astrobiologists for decades now. It's a relatively new field, but we're settling into trying to come up with a manifest idea of what life really is. Because all of us talking tonight, we're all astrobiologists from divergent fields, and that's how we have these fertile discussion. But there have been papers that have talked about the abiotic jumping that boundary, right? And you and I have talked about this too, Patrick, is the idea that hydrothermal systems are conducive to life in reducing environments. And I know that you can speak extensively to this based on your own subject matter expertise. But from a computational standpoint, there have been papers that have been published recently, not recently actually, a while ago, stating that it's possible to actually make predictive paths for evolution of amino acids and peptide chains by RNA synthesis by simply pouring water over serpentine rocks. So
Yeah.
under thermodynamic conditions, you can actually form sort of the precursors for living cells. And the reason I bring that up is that it makes me feel optimistic regarding the evolution of complex life. I don't think that complex life is I think it's sort of obvious. I don't think that complex life is a top-down process. I think it's the emergent property of being in the right conditional window in terms of complexity and thermodynamic state of the universe. So everything we see here on Earth, you know, you have this concept of universality.
Mhm.
It should be ubiquitous in our galaxy as any other galaxy, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, well, overall.
Yeah, like some examples are like L-amino acids are known to catalyze the synthesis of glyceraldehyde from formaldehyde and glyceraldehyde from formaldehyde and glycoaldehyde. And the L isomer, which is the isomer of amino acids we use, will give you the D isomer of glycoaldehyde, which then can go on to produce ribose, which is of course a part of an RNA nucleotide. So it's like autocatalysis. And I think this also applies to like a lot of the B vitamins because vitamins are also like cofactors of enzymes. They aid in catalytic activity. And oftentimes, you know, B vitamins are involved in the synthesis of other B vitamins. So once you have all of those, like in an early cell, you can establish an autocatalytic network, one where the product of the reaction acts as a catalyst, and then as long as you're feeding it a reactant, the reaction network is always going to be expanding. And I think that was actually a key intermediate in the early development of life, where it kind of broke away from just being bound to local geochemistry and then start to become more and more autonomous as time went on.
So maybe when we talk about the evolution of intelligent life, we have to look at it from an agnostic perspective, because if the evolution of intelligent life is intrinsically linked to the evolution of terrestrial planets, that still introduces a bias, right? So how do we approach the water world evolution versus something like a terrestrial world like Mars or Earth?
Yeah, because
and how to approach agnostically, I'm not sure.
Yeah, because like the more and more we study prebiotic chemistry, the more and more like things like hot, cold, wet, dry, acidic, alkaline cycles are elucidated. And I think that really does point to a terrestrial origin of life, like in a hot or warm little pond versus a deep sea vent.
Hmm.
Now, like a lot of people tend to point to like deep sea vents because that's where like a lot of the molecular data converges. But we have to remember is that that's where the last universal common ancestor of everything alive today lived. That wasn't where it began. And like a few 100 million years probably passed between the origin of life and the last common ancestor.
Ooh, that's a good point. I think people are probably enchanted by that deep sea vent idea too, right? Seems like Europa and Enceladus are the leading contenders for extraterrestrial life in the solar system, right? We've come up empty-handed on Mars, as far as I know, thus far. And people yearn for that, like we discussed earlier.
Yeah, because like I honestly think Mars would have been more conducive to the origin of life, but I think like Europa would be way more conducive to its continued evolution. So if something got there, I could see how it could have survived and propagated and possibly even evolved multicellularity because the ionosphere of Jupiter causes like water to split in Europa's ice crust. The hydrogen flies off in space, the oxygen goes into the ocean, and that could sustain multicellular life, intelligent life, possibly.
Wow. So you think there might be intelligent life on Europa?
I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, okay, I wouldn't be flabbergasted. I'd be like a giddy little schoolgirl. I'd be so excited, but
Yeah.
like I would not just be shocked. It wouldn't be something I could never have seen coming.
It would be wild if there was some sort of intelligence in Europa that had the same level of cognition of at least humans, right? But God knows how they evolved. But it'd be something that lived and evolved its entire existence of almost 4.5 billion years. Perhaps no concept of an outside universe. Their whole universe is capped by a 50-kilometer sheet of ice, right? Can't imagine what they think they saw us. What the heck is that?
Gonna be a lift getting to them if they're down there, man. That's from an engineering perspective. Oh yeah.
Would you just like put like a nuclear reactor in the front of a probe and then just have it melt its way down?
Well, you'll need to talk to planetary protection about that one. I mean, I mean, what if we can take the water? And that it just becomes, especially when planetary protection gets involved in the conversation, becomes this incredibly complex issue. And then you're strapping nuclear material onto a rocket.
Oh yeah.
And at least as of right now, NASA. So I mean, that they say that we're going forward with nuclear thermal propulsion. We'll see. They're pretty darn twitchy after both of those shuttle accidents.
Oh yeah.
They have been ever since. Especially because there was cover up. It was essentially at least Challenger happened because there was a schedule push. Engineers were speaking up. They said there was a concern, and but essentially get bent. We have a schedule to keep, and people died. So that the culture, I mean, it's just been a total overreaction to that. So as long as they're still the premium agency and there's not a sea change in their risk averse culture.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, wasn't there like
it's gonna be a tough one.
Wasn't there like also like a probe lost because somebody forgot to switch the units on Mars?
Oh yes. Yes,
I think
that's
that
right.
was a collaboration, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh god.
Climate observer. It was a climate observer. It wasn't decelerating. It slammed right. Sorry. I mean, I support planetary exploration, but whoa.
Yeah, we did a great job there. Well,
they forgot
to sterilize the impact probably.
Yeah. They forgot to convert like English to metric or something like that, you know?
Oh wait, Mitch, I was wondering though, like in engineering, do you guys use like metric or imperial units?
It's mostly metric anymore. It depends, man. Because if I prefer to work in metric units because everything's base 10, right? You don't have to worry about pounds force versus pounds mass, of course. But there are certain subfields, especially within aerospace, like if you're doing propulsion, especially turbo propulsion for like jets, we have so much knowledge because this was one of the centers of jet propulsion development in the world. There's so many resources that are written in those imperial units that people have just kind of they've cut their losses, and we continue to use those because we still have to access all Fortran codes. You don't want to have to think about converting units, and people. It's just like think about the infrastructure investment it would be to change all of our road signs from imperial units to metric units, right? People just don't want to take the leap, especially in propulsion.
Yeah.
Now, in human spaceflight, it's a metric you see a lot more, except that we're still stateside, and if you want to get a part machined, oftentimes you have machinists that are upset with you if you want to work in metric units because the whole machine shop is tuned for inches, right? Thousands of inches for small parts. They want it in thou, right, for tolerances.
Yeah.
So it becomes a burden to like you did design it in metric, but good luck machining it in metric optimal.
Yeah. Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, because like in science, we're kind of like more so in our own little bubble, shall you say? So, because I remember like in 5th grade science class, it was everything was metric.
Sure.
But like I guess
Well,
we don't have to like deal with actually like making stuff that people are going to be using on a regular basis in the United States.
I think so. There was a time I was working turbo propulsion in industry, and I got comfortable enough with the imperial units that I was working musically with those. But most of the time, I just do all my calculations in metric and convert at the end.
Yeah. Oh, but like going back to the UFO thing, like let's just say the roles were reversed and say it's the year 24 something, and we're sent on a mission to explore a nearby star system where like we think like it's habitable based on like atmospheric readings. Then when we get there, we find like a civilization where we were like either in the 1950s or possibly in the 2020s. Like, how should we react if that's what we see when we get there?
Pros.
Let's say no, not a probe. Sorry, let's say like we were like a bunch of people who are astronauts like frozen in cryostasis, woken up, and they find a civilization.
Like what level of advancement?
Like let's just say scenario 1, it's where we're at like say in the 1950s. Scenario 2, 2020s.
So we're ahead of them.
Yeah. So they're where we were in the 1950s.
Right. Jimmy thinks we're going to ask about that. That's it.
Well, right in the 50s, before we, crowded our planet's orbit, and before our nuclear capacity increased, I think, I think we'd be less likely to perceive a hostile threat. But 2020s, I mean, just look at our planet now. I mean, imagine if we flew to a planet that mirrored our own, which was in a persistent state of war and famine and droughts. And, I mean, what would you think? If it was me driving that space module, I'd be very wary of landing.
Yeah, so maybe that's why they're like going to like. Well, okay, I'm not saying I believe it, but I'm saying that I guess like why like that could explain why UFOs are seen often in remote areas, like in the middle of nowhere. Like, would you want to contact these guys' leaders? They could just perceive you as like a threat, and then from like a hostile nation, and then just blow you up.
There's a lot of shotguns in nowhere. I've been out in nowhere. There's a lot of shotguns out there. But the thing is that again, I think it returns back to the idea of sort of social anxieties and what do we experience, right, when the cultures meet. But in terms of the concept of aliens visiting Earth, I think that there's still, unfortunately, especially in academic circles, where tenure is an issue and where reputation is an issue, it suffers from the giggle factor where people don't want to have open discussion inside of academia, inside of universities. And what I find really curious about it, Mitch and I were talking about this once, is that what strikes me really oddly about the whole UAP thing is sort of a rebranding of UFOs, I think, to avoid the giggle factor by giving it a new acronym. But why is it that the military is openly discussing UAPs where in academia, you never hear about it, right? Or it's just now NASA's like, oh, we put together a board and it's on unclassified material, blah, 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 blah. Because the social zeitgeist is like, okay, well, let's know about UAPs. But the majority of people don't care, right? They want to keep up with the Kardashians and not know what's really occurring underneath that rock on the other side of the hill.
Yeah, but why is it like in the past year or so that this has become such a big thing?
It's tough though, right? Because you say academia isn't very interested in UAPs. I don't think. I think I'm no major fan of academia. Yeah. I think that it has a lot of issues. I was at Space Resources Conference. It was like the big international space resources conference. And this goes back to the earlier point, Rich, when we started to talk about cislunar space and competition between essentially allied space agencies. There's the Canadian Space Agency, NASA, the Japanese Space Agency, and the European Space Agency. And then there's China. And, Russia used to be allied. We're obviously at odds now with the war in Ukraine. But when was the last time you heard anybody in any space field in academia discuss the fact that cislunar space is classified by the Space Force as a battle space? Like, we talk about LEO installations, we talk about cislunar installations, NASA talks about Gateway. I don't know if I could have a deep conversation with anybody that I've met at NASA about the fact that, like, hey, it's a battle space. Have you guys considered that? Have you considered that?
Right. So the only place I've heard about it at NASA was a place where I worked, a small program office, and I'm going to give a little shout out for them. They're near and dear to my heart. Is the NASA Innovative Advanced Concepts program based out of the Goddard Space Flight Center, where these discussions are not taboo and where there is an active and extremely passionate and energetic small group of people inside of NASA reaching out with innovators across the United States to push the boundaries along the model of DARPA and discuss things that are radical, including alternative propulsion, and where they have discussed risk profiles and the importance of NASA in terms of maintaining the cislunar high ground. That was in 2017, but since then I have not heard outside of NASA, or excuse me, outside of NIAC. And each center, Mitch, I think probably you would agree, each center has its own culture.
Sure.
And I was then assigned to Johnson, which is extremely conservative, and I would say anti-innovative, right? Because they're dealing with human space flight. They don't want to look at low TRL technologies or something that is going to have immediate benefit to them for human space flight, but also more importantly for the culture of the project managers, which are looking to advance their own careers. And they don't advance their careers by spaceflight failure of experimental technology. So they're just risk averse by nature.
Well, especially because Johnson's whole thing is human spaceflight operations, right? They don't do technology development, but they deploy the systems, they operate the systems, they train the astronauts, right? When it comes to operations, man, you don't want to take risks. You don't want to take stupid risks. And when I'm hammering NASA for risk aversion, I think like this tightrope you walk between like, hey, exploration's risky. People have always died doing it. It's inevitable because it's really hard in space. However, We don't want to mimic the Soviet space program, man.
That's right.
There are a lot of people who didn't need to die.
That's right.
Guys, I hate to cut my time short, but I do have to depart.
All right.
All right. It was nice to see you, man.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Looking forward to picking this up soon.
Great to see you, Jimmy. Keep up the great work.
All right, peace
Thank
out,
you.
bro.
See you guys.
Six. Hold on a minute. Yeah. Okay, yeah. 6, great. I'll be right up. Okay. I can still stay on. I've got to move over a little bit.
Yeah, I could stay up like I'd say 15 more minutes.
I've got to scoot too, fellas. My girlfriend's calling in. You can call me this afternoon. I need to get back to her.
All right.
All right. See you later, boys.
See ya.
Great seeing you.
Yep. Bye-bye.
So I have a couple minutes. Do you want to talk about something in particular?
Let's see. Oh yeah, I was like regarding like weaponization of space though, it's like, do you think there's a chance that a precedent could be set in this current war? Like if let's say the US gave Ukraine anti-sat missiles and they used them against Russian satellites, like
Do I think that the United States will do that?
yeah, or like what kind of like political fallout do you think that would cause?
I don't think that they would.
Okay.
The reason is I think that it's just an opinion, but I think that Ukraine serves as a sort of a bulwark against Russian aggression, right?
Mm-hmm.
That part of the world has been in constant conflict for centuries. I think that Ukraine is a testing ground for military technology applications and results. So the people that construct weapons that are being deployed to Ukraine are not going to give the best of the best because they don't want it to fall into Russian hands or be captured by Russian intelligence or back engineering.
Mm-hmm.
However, for the stuff that's more conventional and tactical conventional, I think those are actually being sent to Ukraine for field testing. What's the efficiency? What's the kill rate, and so forth? How can we improve those technologies? And so the military industrial complex is everywhere. So in Ukraine, and they're using it as a test bed for prototype testing and so forth.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah, and
okay,
I see what you mean. Yeah, and regarding like UFOs, though, like one more topic is what do you think about the idea that we've been visited in ancient times?
yes, the Solarian hypothesis.
No, or like the ancient astronaut thing, because I think there's some like dark history there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's like,
what do you think of the dark history? What stuff are you thinking about?
Like, because wasn't like rooted in the whole thing, like what was it? Oh yeah, it was during like the colonial era or the imperial era during Victorian times. Like people just thought, oh, there's these fancy civilizations here, but there's black and brown people, so there's no way they could have made it. So it had to be something else. And then so like the Nazis came along, ancient Aryan, then people just turned that into ancient aliens. So,
right. Well, right. It serves a strong colonial narrative, right? So, take for example, Greater Zimbabwe in Africa.
Mm-hmm.
There are these megalithic superstructures, which are urban centers that were depopulated, and then the colonization of South Africa by the Rothschild family and also by their associated economic interests when they come down to South Africa for resource exploitation. You know, it's the first step of colonization is to go ahead and degrade the local population, dehumanize them. And so if you dehumanize them, of course, it facilitates the ability to commit genocide as well as resource exploitation, enslavement, and so forth. I wouldn't say that this is just colonization issues by European powers. Those were the ones that were more attuned to historically. But of course, I think it's also human nature across the planet. So you can't attribute a high civilization to the civilization that you're trying to oppress. It sets up a very uncomfortable moral stance.
Mm-hmm.
So, of course, they say there's going to be a lost tribe, or it's going to be white Europeans that in Africa that were destroyed. You hear the same sort of narratives when it comes to North America. It's a constant stream of people that are insistent that North American civilizations, the high civilizations, prior to main European contact in the 15th century, not just regarding Viking contact or anything like that, that it was by a massive influx of white people coming to North America. Mm-hmm. There's no reason that there can't be autonomous high civilizations around the world with correct mixture of social and economic and political conditions. And there's no evidence, I think, either that there was a large influx of Europeans coming over pre-European contact in the 15th century. Mm-hmm. We do see, for example, that it was not a primitive society. North America was heavily populated, established trade routes. We have continuous narrative oral histories that actually are now being determined to be factually accurate. If we look at the Amazon, when I was in college way back when, during the 1990s, during the 1990s, I remember in a biology course, they're talking about biological inclusion in the Amazon, biodiversity. Mm-hmm. Actually, as taught at CU Boulder, that the biological diversity of the Amazon is a function of remnant, isolated populations of organisms during the last glacial maxima. I don't know if you've heard that the Amazonian basin was mostly savanna with small forest patches. And then as the world warmed, the patches interacted. And that's why you have this out of balance high biodiversity. Oh. Well, back in the 15th century, there was a Spanish explorer who went up the Amazonian basin, returned to Spain with fantastic stories of lost civilizations throughout the entire Amazonian basin, down into also Paraguay, that these civilizations went on forever and ever and ever. And it spawned this idea of Ciudad golden cities. He was denounced and said that he was crazy. When he came back, the Spanish explorers came back 50 years later, they found entire cities actually depopulated by smallpox. Mm-hmm. These cities were extended over the entire Amazonian basin. They had, they were well attuned to their environment. They had something called terra preta, which means black earth. Mm-hmm. And they were able to feed a huge population, have sophisticated society by manipulating the environment. So in fact, the Amazonian basin was actually this garden. You think it's basically a garden from one end to the other. And recent studies using LiDAR penetrate the tree canopy, you see these civilizations, remnants of civilizations, roads go on for hundreds to thousands of miles across the basin, attached to cities that are still covered in soil and trees. Yeah, I think it's more of a colonial conversation. Yeah, because and I like to say that the reason they're living hunter-gatherer or in hunter-gatherer societies now is because they're literally in a post-apocalyptic world, because after their civilization was wiped out with smallpox. That's right. That's right. The society just collapsed. Regressive. That's right. Yeah, it's just fascinating. But I think this is really interesting when we're talking about Fermi paradox and things like this, to see how different civilizations in different parts of the world just came up and convergently evolved features like writing and agriculture and things like that, and architecture too. So what do you think about the same argument? People always bring aliens, for example, of Egypt, but also global tep. How do you pronounce that? Global tepe. Göbekli Tepe. Turkey is it's about 12,000 years old, so it's during the full glacial. So it's 14,000 years old during the full glacial, the younger dryas, approximately 9,000 years ago. You have an advanced city, advanced culture with buildings and cities and priesthood and so forth. Meanwhile, at that time, people were supposed to be out there hunting mastodons and mammoths, but in fact, we see the 30 city-states in southeast Turkey. Well, from what I gather, it's actually not a city. It's more of just a monument, and people could have more of a monument. Yeah, and people could have been wandering around and within a localized area, so semi-nomadic,
and then just being return to that place and build a little bit at a time. So I don't think it was.
So
Yeah. I don't necessarily think it was like a civilization. I mean, I think maybe people might have been farming around there at the time. So they could have been somewhat sedentary. I think farming probably first began in Syria. It was like, what, 12, 14,000 years ago. So I wouldn't rule out the idea that it could have spread to Turkey by then. But yeah, I don't think that the presence of Göbekli Tepe necessarily means there was a civilization as we understand it.
Still, it's striking to me that there's this advanced art technique and a way to manipulate large stones and so forth during a time where it was thought that humans, effectively worldwide, were fairly primitive nomadic hunters gatherers. But we see that may not necessarily be the case. It might have been a much more diverse world than we thought.
Yeah.
Culturally far back.
Well, if we just look at the archaeological record of the Paleolithic and the Pleistocene, we find very diverse cultures, like different kinds of arts, different kinds of textiles, all that kind of stuff. So they were sophisticated, but they just weren't sedentary.
So how do you bind the idea of early civilizations or early sophistication with the question earlier of alien intelligence on Earth, visiting Earth, and so forth? How would you wrap it in a nice tight bow if you could? What would you say?
What do you mean? Like, do I think that we've been visited early on?
Do you think it would necessitate? There was this advancement in terms of human behavior about 40,000 years ago in terms of advanced tool use and so forth. We see that the evolution of human society was not linear, but it sort of jumps and starts in exponential growth. But then people pointing to alien intervention, do you find that to be a disservice to serious academic thought?
Oh yeah, for sure.
There might be, okay.
Because like in evolutionary biology, there's this discourse between gradualism and punctuated equilibrium, but it's probably a mix of both. And I think it's the same thing with like human society. And sometimes advancements slowly build off each other. Other times hard times lead to innovation.
Right.
So it's at the surface.
So do you think innovation then probably flourishes with a degree of challenge, external challenge, to push the medical innovation, but not enough to actually collapse the stability of the party being innovative?
Maybe that would have been the case before we had the advent of writing and a good way to actually store information and really build on top of it, rapidly build on top of it, let alone the age of the internet. But I think that the whole innovation or challenges drive innovation thing is more so relevant in the Pleistocene than versus like post-civilization.
And so there was a meeting recently in Houston at the Lunar Planetary Institute with invited researchers from Ames Research Center, JPL, and then universities and so forth, to specifically discuss technosignatures and discuss where, if there were technosignatures, where we should be looking. And it was interesting because I've read the invitation, I had to submit a request to attend, unfortunately, for some sort of conflict, I forgot what it was. But the idea was if there was any sort of previous civilizations on Earth, we'd be able to detect them. And this goes back to this concept of Silurian hypothesis. How would we see them? How would we know that they were there? And this discussion was interesting because we think that, we're the end-all, be-all culmination of evolution, and that our technologies and our buildings and so forth will outlast us. But in the reality of things, if the lights were to shut off tomorrow and we would disappear, most of the signature of humanity would be gone within a million years.
I don't.
With the exception of, go ahead, you would disagree?
Yeah, I disagrey because if say you dump an electronics dumpster, it gets buried over time. Eventually, the components are going to look nothing like computer chips or whatever. But if somebody found that, they noticed, whoa, there's like a really high concentration of all these different rare earth minerals that just no way they could have formed naturally or erode.
Right.
It can be like it can get buried, but eventually, parts of it are going to get fossilized, and then you're going to see this long zigzagging thing that couldn't have been formed by a scream. So I think there would be remnants that we could detect of ancient civilizations. So I don't really buy into the Silurian hypothesis.
Yeah, that's right. I agree. Yeah, I agree. And sort of metal excursions of metal concentrations, redox conditions that shouldn't be there, anomalous isotopes that shouldn't be in association with one another. From that standpoint, then you look at like Avi Loeb's work. He recovered these micrometeorites from the Indian Ocean floor near Papua New Guinea, with claiming that it was a extraterrestrial object that had burnt up in the atmosphere, and that he had recovered these small iron-dominated globules that he's saying are probably the pieces of a melted extraterrestrial craft. And I'm going to be honest, to me, that stretches credibility quite a bit.
Yeah.
I like Avi. He's a pretty cool guy, and I'm glad he's out there speaking up. But I don't think that he has it down in terms of all the ways he could actually do that, right?
Yeah. Also, like, I think in space, though, things aren't going to corrode. Things aren't going to weather. It's going to be things are going to be much more recognizable when they fall to Earth.
What do you mean?
Like a probe can last in space for millions of years. A computer that you just dump somewhere on Earth, sure. I mean, if it gets buried, it might leave a recognizable signature of like a bunch of metals that shouldn't be there together. But it's not going to be something that a person would just dig up and then know what to do with. They just find a blob of weird colored dirt.
Right.
But like with stuff in space, there's no like weathering processes or extremely slow weathering processes from like ion interactions, whatever. And I think we can actually recognize macroscopic structures.
Right. Well, I think that one of the problems is that also this claim that it's extraterrestrial is really out there, because we know, and it's been known for a long time, that there's loads of micrometeorites in the ocean floor, right? So if you go out to places in the oligotropic ocean, there's not a high sedimentation rate. So if there's not a high sedimentation rate, we're going to capture micrometeorites in a higher concentration without them being diluted by plankton infall and sedimentation out there in the middle of the ocean basins. I think he has a long way to go to convince anybody that it's actually an evidence of extraterrestrial craft. At this point, I don't buy it.
Yeah, that kind of thing, it like harkens back to what Mitch was talking about before we started recording, which is that like there needs to be more data. It needs to be more solid. Like, we shouldn't be taking fighter pilots' word for it. We should be asking them, like, can we see your radar, your IR recordings, or whatever kind of sensors you had on your plane before. We should really launch congressional hearings into this stuff.
That's right. So you think that if at the end of the day, we've met today and chatted, do you think that we're any closer to answering the question that we started with this conversation?
Are there aliens? Well, I think we all started by saying that we probably have never been visited, even though we think there's intelligent life out there. So in that sense, we're where we started off, but I think we've elaborated our position very well.
Interesting. Okay. Well, my friend, it's wonderful seeing you and seeing the whole gang, the whole pack. I've got to run home to my work, and I just wanted to thank you for inviting us to meet with you today.
All right, no problem. Hope to do this again sometime.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Take care, Patrick. Take care, Internet world. We'll talk to you soon, okay?
All right, see ya.
All right, bye, buddy.
Wolfpack out.